Good afternoon, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So this is a video about Trump's latest outburst. I know it's a title I've been forced to use before, but he really has excelled himself with trade wars, with wanting to buy Greenland, and on and on and on. So Trump's deterioration into mania, into Alzheimer's, into senility really just continues apace. Remember when trade wars were good and easy to win? What happened to that? Which trade war has anybody ever won? I wonder why he didn't cite any examples. And if the trade war was so good, why was he de-escalating it several months ago? And now it's escalating. You know, he was going to suspend the imposition of some of these tariffs. Why delay it? If it's so fantastic, the United States is going to win hands down. Speed it up, don't slow it down. Anyway. So I wonder why he was giving such respite to China, if it was going to be good for the United States to really hammer the Chinese who are raping us, not an insensitive use of language or anything, was it, by President Trump? Well, he let up because it was hurting America and not Cathay, and even Trump knew that. So remember Trump was saying how the United States, was suffering very badly from the Chinese being so unfair. As though Trump cares about fairness, doesn't give a damn about the poor or justice in its legal sense or any other sense, or integrity or even-handedness or honesty. He's a complete stranger to fairness. Anyway, of course, it's going to be American consumers who pay these tariffs, not Chinese companies. Admittedly, Chinese companies presumably would sell less of their product than they otherwise would do because of the tariffs, because Trump has obviously artificially inflated the price of these things. But Trump doesn't really seem to grasp this fundamental of tariffs. Or is he perhaps not as moronic as he pretends? He just assumes that tens of millions of his supporters are that idiotic. They won't understand that it's American consumers who are paying the tariffs, not Chinese companies. And China has other markets. So the United States is less important than it was and is becoming less important all the time. Mustn't exaggerate about America's relative and absolute economic decline, but it is going on. So in about 10 years' time, China is projected to overtake the United States as the world's largest economy. And China is obviously more important, is gaining strength by the day. They haven't had an economic downturn for decades. It's just been a question of growth being slower than it otherwise was. Double-digit growth sometimes, maybe as low as 6% other times, but that was an enviable figure if you're any other country. So the balance of power is continually tilting more and more towards Beijing and away from Washington, D.C. And China's resilient. They can win this for so many reasons. They don't have to worry about a pesky free media. Trump would cover that situation. Dissent is stamped on, so they're just crushingly efficient at surveilling their population. So the Chinese can suffer for years. They'll tough it out. They don't have to worry about an electoral cycle. And they remember only a generation ago having much lower living standards. So a small dip in their living standards, they can tolerate it. They've dealt with far worse. And obviously the Chinese government doesn't give a damn about the Chinese people. It was willing to kill them in huge numbers. Remember, only 30 years ago, probably several thousand protesters shot dead in the middle of Tiananmen Square, Beijing. And the Chinese government still doesn't release an estimate of the number dead. Why? Presuming the figure was so high that it would scandalize the world. So Xi doesn't have to worry about public opinion, which he can craft through state media. And obviously Trump would like to do that because Trump thinks he's a fantastic PR guy, which is why he's out there blabbering his mouth off with his insane ramblings and wacko attackos on anyone who dares questions his maniacal behavior. So the Chinese can tough it out. The United States, they don't have that staying power. I'm not saying that I would or my people would. No, I don't want to suffer economically. But this is a disaster made on Pennsylvania Avenue. It's all Trump's fault. This was completely avoidable. So the Chinese have had far worse times in recent memories. And Trump is utterly moronic for believing that he can bludgeon them into submission. He can't beat them. They have time on their side. Things are going their way anyway. And obviously, Trump has got 1 year and 3 months to the next election. He's living on borrowed time. 15 months to go. Now, I'm not saying that his defeat is a foregone conclusion, but he has made it a bit more likely. And his tirades have wiped hundreds of points off the Dow Jones. So his absurdities have consequences. That's causing market mayhem. So that's the one thing. Previously, he could be highly irresponsible, and he's an attention seeker. He was just compelled to grab media attention, what in media ho, to say anything to make a splash. But now it really does make a splash, an economic splash. Anyway, so he's wreaked havoc in the United States in so many ways, not just in the White House, by having such a high turnover of staff. But markets, everybody knows, like continuity, like predictability. Companies like that is good for investment. They can make longer term plans. That's why countries like China, South Korea, Singapore, some of these Asian tigers, Malaysia, have had very steady economic growth, because they say, well, we're rock solid, we're stable, we're dependable, your investments are safe with us, safe as houses, you know that. Safe as the Bank of England, people sometimes used to say, no unpleasant surprises. Well, they've had some, the United States has had some nasty surprises under Trump, so there'll be yet more shocks. Remember, the shock doctrine is one of the things that got Trump elected, creating the shock waves, feeling them reverberating back to him, just inflaming his base, infuriating them, directing their hatred against scapegoats, and trying to victimize ethnic minority groups. So Trump is erratic, but the question is there any madness to his method? Well, it seems like there is. That it's not just a tactic. I think it really is his personality. So some people say, oh, he's played the white working class like a fiddle. To some extent he has, but he's actually undermining their economic interests, and some of them are starting to perceive it. Obviously, some working class whites were against him from day one, but his loyal supporters have mostly stayed with him. That's the point to which I'll return. So he's got an explosive temper. He's so erratic. He's emotionally incontinent. This is a behavior that would disgrace a toddler. And he has no filter, just coming out with these insults against anyone who asks him some worthwhile questions, because it's all about him. He's so egomaniacal. People have to kowtow to him. If you're not obtrusively obsequious to him, then that rubs him up very badly. He demands utter obeisance, and he gets it from some of the sycophants who surround him, his claque. So it seems he's got Tourette syndrome for policy, if policy is the right word indeed, making things up on the hoof. We're going to do this, we're not going to do that, and stay away, because it'll all be changed tomorrow. Purchasing Greenland. Who on earth said Greenland was ever for sale? When has one country bought the national territory of another? Not for decades. Was it even in the 20th century did that ever happen? We know there was the Alaska Purchase or the Louisiana Purchase back in the 19th century, but the 20th century, I can't think of examples of that actually. Sometimes territory was exchanged, but not because it was sold as such, as part of some other treaty, sometimes a peace treaty. But the Danish Prime Minister, she quite correctly, Mette Frederiksen, said it was absurd. And indeed it was ludicrous. Then he said it was nasty for her to decline and call it absurd. Well, she was stating the plain truth, and he's someone who prides himself on his plain speaking. Well, that woman was not pusillanimous. She didn't mince words. She called it what it was. And yet he can't take it when he's shown up to be the chump that he is, in an offering to buy something which wasn't for sale. I mean, obviously Congress would have to be willing to spend the money. And what about the wishes of the people who live in Greenland? It's an autonomous territory of the Danish realm. So, and then Trump has cancelled a state visit to Denmark over this issue, which obviously is the height of bad manners, a revolting breach of protocol. How would he feel if a foreign head of state did that to him? Of course, he'd be incandescent with rage. But he said, you don't speak that way to America, at least when I'm in charge. So again, it all comes down to him. It all comes down to this bullying thing, his megalomania. I'm bigger than you am. I'm gonna swagger, and then you just have to suck up to me, down on your knees, countries which are puny. Anyway, as for breaches of protocol, remember Obama was hauled over the coals for not going to Antonin Scalia's funeral. He was that Supreme Court judge who died of a heart attack about 3 years ago. And then Trump said he can order US companies to pull out of China. He was ordering them. Order issued by tweet, not an executive order. It's ultra vires. Does he have any legal authority to order United States companies to pull out of China, to find other markets? This is not a command economy. What happened to the free market? What happened about capitalism? Small government? The government not controlling every tiny facet of your life. Surely businesses know best how to make money, not the president. And by the way, what a loser. He's the biggest loser in America. How many billions of dollars did he lose? $10 billion? I'm a far better businessman than him. I haven't lost any money. So anyway, so much for the Republicans being the party of big business, if they're going to tolerate this behavior. So when is the Republican Party going to refine its courage and say, no, this is completely unacceptable, this is outrageous, this is idiotic, the president can't order companies to do this or that? And is he going to try and somehow abuse his executive powers, the War Powers Act or anything like that, try and stop them doing it, claiming it's a national emergency like on the border? Do you remember how that national emergency has disappeared in the past few months? He's not talking about that one, I suppose, because he knows his policy is failing. Or about, steel tariffs. That was another issue of national security. And the thing is, it's the boys who cries wolf, because when an issue that really is touching on national security comes along, people aren't going to believe what he says. Anyway, so the grand old party used to say that they did capitalism best. It was the Democrats, the party of big government, of interference, and look what Trump wants to do. The GOP was supposed to be best for jobs and growth. Well, it definitely isn't under Trump. The man's economically illiterate. So he said the dollar is the strongest ever, bragging about it. Well, if I were a braggart, I don't think I'd be coming up with that one, because everybody knows if your currency is too strong, that damages your economy, and it's terrible for exports. And there he is railing about, the trade imbalance. Other countries aren't purchasing American products enough. Well, why don't you make some good products at an attractive price? He accused the Chinese of currency manipulating, which is probably true, deliberately weakening the yuan, because when the renminbi is weaker, it's easier for them to export their products. But so China would do this, obviously, because it boosts trade. So therefore, don't say that the dollar having a very high value is something to be proud of. So anyway, Trump says there are more people in work than ever before. Well, that wouldn't be hard, since the American population is higher than ever before. I mean, just about every president's been able to boast that. But in real terms, wages are lower, and they're falling. Healthcare is costlier than ever. As Ernest Bevin said, an illness should not be an indulgence. Higher education is pricier than ever. Anyway, so what if Trump got his way? What if he could wave that magic wand and stop all commerce between China and the United States? Where would the United States source so many products that it needs? Now, they could make some of them at home, others they couldn't make at home, certainly not at a reasonable price. And so that would hit the average consumer a lot. Their t-shirts, for example, are a lot more expensive. So why do we import things? Because other countries make products which are higher quality or a lower price, a combination of the two. That's why. And the United States, where would it find a market for its exports? Yes, there are other countries, but they're not going to be able to absorb a lot of this excess stuff. So yes, it would hurt the American economy hugely. Though there would be a few winners within the United States out of it. It would hurt the Chinese too, but not as much. And as I say, they're willing to take it. So China bought US debt years ago, which is keeping the American economy afloat. And as Hillary Clinton, she said in 2010, came out in those WikiLeaks diplomatic cables, how do you argue with your banker? China is America's banker, has been for quite some years now. So they've got the United States by the short and curlies. So there we see Trump throwing tantrums, throwing the toys out of the pram when he's challenged about anything. And screaming, coming in out with ad hominem. The man has no class, no finesse, no self-restraint. He's so impulsive and visceral, shoots from the lip, and he's so vain because he always brings it back to numero uno. He's crude, he's cruel, and he's a vulgarian. Now, I like vulgar humour, but there's a time and a place for everything, not during a presidential oration. And he's prone to these ill-judged flights of rhetoric. What sort of example does he set to America's children? There he is, the pinnacle of American society, the person they're supposed to look up to. He's a disgrace. And what do other countries make of the United States due to electing President Trump, saying there's this foaming at the mouth racist, this idiot, this bigot, this egomaniac, he's just vile, he boasts about committing sex crimes against women on tape, he's a pathological liar, he tells the most brazen falsehoods, he refuses to back down or apologize. In most countries, the head of state's like the fountain of honor. That's how it's supposed to be in the United Kingdom. People strive to live up to that. Trump couldn't possibly be more dishonourable. He's got no decorum, no common decency, a man who's utterly bereft of dignity, of manners, so uncouth, a yob and a yahoo, an ignoramus who's even ignorant of his own ignorance. Okay? The beginning of wisdom is to know your limitations. I have my shortcomings, I've failed in things, I've made mistakes, and they're things I'm terrible at. You know, I've got weak areas, things I can't do, and I'm aware of the limits of my knowledge. So that's how I try to be wise. So Trump wants to be a despot, which is why he so gushes over these savage tyrants like Kim Jong-un, that he really has no bedrock beliefs. That's why diplomacy, everything's all transactional. I do this for you, you do this for me. There's no principle involved. There's no morality. There's no shared values. And the things about common values like freedom of expression, free and fair elections, and independent judiciary and so forth, is that we'll stick together because we believe in some of the same things. Whereas a deal can be broken, and Trump's a great one for breaking deals, because there's no sustained common interest. There's nothing to hold you together like that. There's no world view. Anyway, the one thing I thought might begin to sink him is his profanities. Remember looking to the heavens and calling himself the chosen one, saying he was the king of the Jews, taking all these messianic titles? Well, we've long known he's had messianic delusions, but he's not used these sort of titles before. And this blasphemy, does that not mortally offend Christian fundamentalists? Because remember, the religious right are a core component of the Republican base, have been for a long time, despite the fact that Trump is about as unlike Jesus as is possible to be. And you'd think that would be our red line, that they just simply cannot tolerate that these godlike delusions, they would be nauseated. There was a time in Christendom when you would have been burnt at the stake for saying that kind of thing. Where are the ministers of religion? Where are the bishops and the preachers and the pastors? They should be on television lacerating him for insulting Christianity. So he's profaned the Christian faith, and so far as I know, none of these Bible bashers have come out against him. You think they play very badly in the Bible Belt. So those who believe they are Christ, they have a place in society in a psychiatric hospital. These people are in dire need of help. They shouldn't have their finger on the nuclear trigger, might want to bring on the Armageddon. So everyone has been known for many decades that Trump has had these fantasies of might and splendor, these majestic delusions of grandeur. I defy anybody to say he's not unhinged now. And then there was yet another racially tinged screed saying Jews must vote for him or else they're disloyal. Disloyal to what? To who? The United States? Well, everybody knows that people are allowed to vote for any party, not just the two main ones. Could be the Green Party, Reform Party, could be not vote at all if you don't think there's anyone worth voting for. Oh, so white Gentiles have a choice, but Jews aren't allowed one? This is absurd and nauseating. And obviously many issues for Jewish American voters. Israel is one of them, but if they identify primarily with the United States rather than Israel, then they would obviously have to care more about what's happening in the US than what's happening in the Middle East. So a bit like the squad. So non-whites, they have a right to dissent. But women of colour, people of colour, have fewer rights, according to Trump, that the squad, they should leave the United States. I mean, one of whom is a born American, born in Puerto Rico. I know it's a territory, not a state of the US, but she is a born US citizen. It's shocking. It's nauseating. I mean, how low can you go? Well, he's just reached a new low. And how about the movers and the shirkers of the Republican Party who ought to be calling him out? Only a few of them have found the courage to speak out against him. I'm vainly hoping the dam will break and that just more and more will say, no, this is sickening. This man is simply intolerable. So there he is, ranting and raving. He's 12 points behind in the opinion polls, which obviously he will say are nonsense. But it comes back to this, is the economy stupid, as Bill Clinton said in 1992? And that really is the litmus test of whether he's going to get re-elected or not. Now, it's true that sitting presidents are usually re-elected. The Republicans are getting jittery. Soon it might be getting to panic stations because the economy is hurting. The Dow Jones up to now was his biggest success. We can boast about that. But the thing is, there was such inequality that the average American wasn't really gaining. Yes, it's a tiny number at the top who gained from his tax cuts. So there may be a primary challenge to him, but I can't think the last time a sitting president lost a primary challenge. I don't think that's going to happen. But the very fact that there will be a serious primary challenge would be a deep humiliation. So his screeds against the chairman of the US Federal Reserve. Well, they were yet again unprecedented. So often with Trump, we're in uncharted territory. Saying this man was a bigger enemy than President Xi. Can you not get rid of him if he's an enemy? Enemy of the people, as in Trump doesn't like you, therefore you're an enemy. He doesn't really grasp the concept of loyal opposition or honest disagreement. And he has no idea what objectivity is, I suppose because he's got no objectivity himself, which is to calmly, dispassionately seek the truth. Even if that's inconvenient for the powers that be. This is what civil servants are supposed to do. Public servants in the FBI, the CIA, any branch of government really, to giving politicians, giving those with executive power as well, candid and disinterested advice, not seeking any gain for myself or not seeking to wreak vengeance on my foes, and tell you what the situation is, and not tinging it with any partisan bias. So people should try and listen to their counsel. Now, perhaps it's impossible to be totally unbiased, but try as much as you can to be fair-minded, to be even-handed. It doesn't always mean something in the middle, just to tell the truth, frankly, without fear or favour, without trying to put a gloss on it, without trying to make it more palatable or indeed unpalatable. So that's what a sagacious person would do. Anyone with a brain in the right place wants to be well informed and would call for such unvarnished advice. Tell the plain truth without fear or favour, and sage decisions are those which are made when grounded on fact and on expert advice. Instead of shrieking and killing the messenger, you don't like the advice, therefore it's bogus. How childish is that? Always emotionalising things, and yet he calls his opponents snowflakes. So if I don't like it, it's not true. That's really is his mindset, which is of course despicable. So he's infantile as he is imbecilic. It's easy to see why Trump went bankrupt so many times when he would not face up to unwelcome truths. So people have got to speak truth to power. Sean Hannity likes that expression, but of course Trump cannot abide it if anyone says anything he finds uncongenial. So likening the chairman of the US Federal Reserve to President Xi. Xi obviously sends hordes of spies against the United States. I know the United States put spies on China, but the chairman of the Federal Reserve is not spying on the United States. The two countries are facing off against each other, are rivals in several regions of the globe. The People's Republic of China backs up North Korea up to a point, and the United States is desperate trying to strangle the North Korean economy in order to force them to disarm their nuclear weapons. And of course, Trump has set himself up for another huge failure there, and indeed it's been an ignominious failure when Kim Jong-un is thumbing his nose at Trump, firing those missiles, being provocative, and Trump is not even whimpering about it. Nary a word now, because that would draw yet more attention to a catastrophe for Trump, despite having invested so much political capital in going there to North Korea, something which could have been a big reward for the North Koreans if they made a major concession. He gave them the Trump card straight away. So, and the United States, finds that China is inimical to American values. China, with its unfair trials, with its hundreds of thousands of political prisoners, with secret trials, with mass detentions of people based on ethnicity and race. How would you feel if, say, Christians in the United States were all locked up, or whites were all locked up? It would be a moral outrage, completely unacceptable. But in China, that's happening to a different ethnic group, in a different religious group. The mass executions in China, it's a state secret, so massive state secrecy, no Freedom of Information Act, complete opposite. And the number is also a state secret. It must be that scandalously high. Execution for crimes which are less than treason and murder, things like that. No free elections, forced abortions, although those ended a couple of years ago. No freedom for expression. And remember, they're often free speech warriors, the Trumpsters. Kidnapping dissidents abroad. Well, all right, the United States used to do that before George W. Bush. In fairness, I think that actually that doesn't happen under Trump. I haven't heard about that in recent years. Extraordinary rendition. So up until now, nothing Trump has done has seriously dented his popularity of the people who voted for him last time, who seem to be willfully blind to his manifold faults. Some people who voted for him 3 years ago have died, but they're not being replaced at the same rate as Democrats. If you look at people who turned 18 in the last 3 years, they break heavily towards the Democrats. So Trump has stretched the bounds of impunity, but voters will probably punish him if he damages the economy, as indeed he is doing. But there's much left to play for. The economy could yet turn around. Trump could somehow pull a rabbit out of a hat with some supposed military victory, raining bombs on some brown people, or some démarche, some treaty with another country. He could manage to ratchet up racial animus in a way which works for him at the polls. He could perform a volte-face on anything. There's really just no telling what we're going to wake up to, what the news is going to be tomorrow. He will never explain, never apologise, never eat humble pie, because he's not man enough for that. So the trade war with China, let's face it, it has been a resounding victory for China. So the Democrats, they need to choose someone without the negatives. Hillary Clinton had very high negatives. They need someone with name recognition. Joe Biden is the obvious choice, despite his shortcomings. With Kamala Harris as a balanced ticket, as a running mate, there will be a balanced ticket. Now, I know that she has castigated previously for not doing enough about to racially integrate schools, but I'm sure they could kiss and make up. Trump is criminally insane. He is a swivel-eyed, foam-flecked, pernicious maniac, a rabid racist. I very much want to see the back of him.